This episode is brought to you by the WatershapeSociety. Episode 24, Anatomy of an Expert Witness Case with SWD Master Dave Peterson and SWD Master Paolo Benedetti. They'll be discussing about the process of an expert witness case, from beginning to end, and how to avoid litigation. Enjoy this informative episode.
Hello and welcome to the Ask the Masters podcast. This podcast is dedicated to discussions about the design and construction of water shapes. The hosts of the show are all certified SWD masters who represent the leading builders and designers within the water shaping industry today.
Well, here I am today on Ask the Masters with fellow master Dave Peterson from WatershapeSociety Consulting. I'm Paolo Benedetti from Aquatic Technology in Morgan Hill. And today our topic, we're going to be talking about expert witness work. We're talking about cases, talking about not specific cases, but talk about kind of the due diligence and what happens and kind of the process of a expert witness case from kind of beginning to end, and what pool contractors can do to avoid having us step foot in their projects.
Yeah, well, it's funny, most of these cases start off with very simple things, and it often is a small argument maybe between the homeowner and the builder. Other times it might be, like a crack shows up or the tile, starts falling off, and usually there's just a lack of communication and the builder isn't willing to step up and do something about it. And so over time, that starts to wear on the owner to the point where he says, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go get an expert. And then we get out to the field, and we were called out to look at one or two small things, and it's our responsibility to find out any other issues with it. It wouldn't make sense for us to go out and just look at the crack and ignore an electrical problem that might actually kill somebody. So our requirement, our due diligence requires that we start digging into a lot of other things that go beyond maybe the original claim. And so we end up oftentimes unraveling a lot of issues. There's you're really looking behind the curtain at that point. And sometimes behind the curtain is you're coring through the pool and finding voids behind the steel's in the dirt. There is no steel. I found that in one of our projects, just not nearly enough steel, or the spacing was much greater than the original drawings. And then we start digging into the drawings and finding problems with the engineer's construction documents. And even if things were done right, it's like, well, the engineering was faulty. And so we end up usually unraveling a lot of things that weren't on the original docket. And that it could be contractual issues, fraud, breach of contract, things that violate the contractor state license board rules, right, in terms of payments and all that kind of stuff. So all of a sudden you start to sort of build a case pretty easily without a whole lot of research.
And even if there was no fraudulent intent, things do become criminally fraudulent if the contractor is making material misrepresentations in their documents. So that can be anything from affidavits they sign down at the building department when they're pulling permits, things they're signing under perjury down there. You are signing on the line. You're signing an affidavit down there. So there's those issues, but there's also when they make promises to the owners about things. So they might promise in contracts to do things, but then they don't deliver. Whether it's, oftentimes we've worked some cases together over the years. We go out and actually look at the contract or the original plans and say, okay, it said they're going to have this and this and this and this. And then we go, wait a minute, there's no UV and there's no ozone. Where is it? Mm-hmm. You paid for it. It's in the contract, but it's not here on the equipment set.
Right.
So sometimes it might be just sheer oversight. Those kind of things are kind of hard to prove. But when there's things, material misrepresentations about the size of the pool, where it's placed, that they're hiring different experts, engineers, and soils engineers, and they just never come out to the site, things are going to start to unravel.
Yeah, and documentation is really important, and some of the easiest cases have been the ones where the owner was taking video and lots of photos, and Even photos, at some point through the discovery process, everybody's information all gets pooled together into a library, and you get to see photos of the whole process as it was going on, and sometimes videos, and then we end up using those as evidence in the case.
And a lot of homeowners are excited about the pool being built, so they're out there taking pictures of the various progress and phases of construction. Oftentimes after the crew leaves for the day, they go out there and just kind of documenting what's happening and the timelines as it goes on. So it really allows us to kind of go back without even doing destructive testing. We can actually zoom in and see exactly what happened. It also helps with our destructive testing because we can zoom in on specific areas and say, this is an area we want to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes the photos help the builders get out of trouble too, because I'm
Right.
not always representing the homeowner. Sometimes it's the builder that's being accused of some problem, and then I can start to look at the photos and say, well, no, I mean the owner's expert is claiming X, Y, and Z, but look, here's a photo that flies in the face of argument X, and here's
Right.
one that disproves Y, and here's one that disproves Z. So, where is the truth, and what is really the root of the problem?
Right.
And I'm not afraid to say, you as the builder, you goof this up, you got to
Right.
go fix it or pay for it to get fixed. But and there's a learning process there, and it's unfortunate, but I don't want to get in that position where I'm okay with something bad happening on one job and I'm not okay with it on another job. It's either done right or it's done wrong.
It's pretty black and white.
Yeah, and you just lay it all out. And I've made mistakes, and I've just said, you know what, I got to go fix it.
You've got to own it.
I had a raised bond beam detail, and it had curves. We did this probably in 2005. My tile crew went out there, and they were putting the tile on in a diamond shape, and they tiled this whole back wall. And I get this call from the owner, just upset that it didn't look right. So I immediately drove out there and I looked at it and I said, "You're right. This is awful." And I hadn't been out there in 2 days, so I didn't see it. One of my other project managers was running it, and
Right.
just he thought it was acceptable, but he thought when it was grouted, it would all look right. And I said, "It's never going to look right." So I said,
it was crooked.
Yeah, it was just, on a radius, things are just hard to do. And they were
Right.
trying to put the tiles at a diamond. And I
Right.
just said, it's not going to work on a curved wall like that. You got to straighten the tile out.
You don't have a tile bender?
So we stripped it all out. We stripped it all out, at my own expense. And I bought all new tile, and we just went and fixed it. But the second job wasn't done very well because the radius in a couple of spots was so tight that even though we now turned the tile to the right shape
Correct.
and didn't have the corners popping out and that funky shape.
Right.
If I had
The
known they were
tips- the
doing a
tips popping
diamond to begin with, I would have said it's never going to work on a radius. But even when they straightened it out, it didn't quite look right. So guess what?
You did it
I
again.
told them to do it again. So we did it 3 times. We ended
Did
up
you pick
tiling.
smaller tiles the last time so they could actually
Yeah, we
work the
went with a
radiuses?
smaller
Right.
tile, and that was one of the problems.
It's finding those real old time craftsmen that have the board stretchers and the tile benders. There are very few of those craftsmen out there
Yeah.
that can make that stuff work.
But it's about communication and just getting things right. And I think if the builders, when they're first accused of having a problem, would just say, you know what, we goofed this up, we're going to fix it, it makes everything go a lot smoother. And I've had builders call me up and say, I built this pool, it's been great for 3 years, it's got a crack in it. Before this thing blows up in our face, I told the owner that I will fly you out there and get an engineer to look at this. And then I end up developing, a relationship between all of them to try to resolve it with the understanding.
Try to mediate it.
Yeah.
And be proactive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly one person's paying my bill to come out there, and as an engineer, you're supposed to, really focus on your client. But in that kind of a situation, it's not a confrontational thing. It's the owner and the builder have kept good communication, and they've both agreed that bringing in a third party to not even mediate the situation, just to figure out what is the best solution to fix this. And if I come up with a $20,000 solution, the builder goes, great, that's better than the $200,000 lawsuit I was facing a week ago. So we'll do it. And everyone moves forward, and it's a much better deal, you know. So it could work both ways, finding out about all these little details and everything, and working for either builders or the owners. To me, it doesn't really matter. It's whoever gets to me first, I guess, gets the benefit of my expertise.
And one thing as an expert witness that I always make sure that I tell clients is, look, the cards are going to fall where they fall. And if I'm hired by the homeowner or hired by the builder, I said, my job is to call it like I see it. And just because you're paying my bill doesn't mean that I'm going to render an opinion that's positive, that paints you in a positive light. And if it's I had a recent project back earlier this year, hired by some homeowners, and they had a bunch of issues. Some of the issues were very valid; they're structural issues. Some other ones were just very picky. And I told him, look, some of these are kind of unreasonable. He's within his workmanship tolerances that are acceptable by industry standards. I said, but some of the things are obviously just absolute mess. But you have to be able to tell the clients right up front that the cards are going to fall where they fall. So be prepared when the report comes out. There's going to be things in there that you might not agree with. But
Yeah, and I've had those clients that they by the time they get to me, they've already gotten an attorney. They've already spent a lot of money, figuring things out to the point where they've brought me in. And, the attorney and the homeowners are like, we're getting a whole new pool. I want this whole thing ripped out. We're starting all over. And I'm looking at it going, no. If that's the argument that you guys want to make today, I'm not your guy. I can't advocate for that because I don't believe in it.
Right.
If there were serious issues that would require it, absolutely, let's go do that. But this project is easily fixable. It may cost $100,000, but it's not the $900,000 or $1 million that you're looking for. We could fix this for $50,000 or $100,000 or something. So let's focus on that. And if we do that, then the other side will probably be a lot more reasonable about, hey, this is the right way to do it. Maybe their insurance will cover it, or maybe the builder can just write a check, or maybe the builder will come back in, if they're trustworthy, to actually do the repairs.
Right.
And
fix it.
It's not a big deal, but yeah, it's you want to you as an expert, you want to support the truth over everything. And you don't want to advocate
and what's reasonable.
Yeah, you don't want to advocate an unreasonable position. Right. And not every pool deserves to be ripped out.
Absolutely, not every pool deserves to be torn out. The a similar case was an issue with a leaky pool, and the owners were insisting that they wanted the whole thing torn out. And I said, no, it's a $20,000 fix. Mm-hmm. We just need to address the leaky skimmer that doesn't have rebar around it that's pulling away. We need to just open up the wall, let's tie some steel in, let's install a new skimmer, let's get it tied into the shell, we'll deal with it. Mm-hmm. It's just a very simple fix, replaster the pool. The biggest expense was replastering the pool. And of course the builder didn't want to deal with that. And I said, well, you know what? Otherwise they're going to push you for all the damage to the landscaping and everything else. I said, if they're willing to do it for $20,000, run.
Yeah,
run.
Let's talk about insurance for a minute, because I think a lot of people misunderstand how general liability insurance works, because it doesn't cover the builder's workmanship issues.
So a lot of people are under the misunderstanding that if you build something incorrectly, that your insurance company is going to pay to fix it. And yeah, that's probably the big mistake. What the insurance companies cover is damages that result from your workmanship. So, for instance, if you have a pool that's leaking, and then the leaking water causes damage in a basement or in a wine cellar, it'll pay to fix the damage to the wine cellar. It won't necessarily fix the leaky pool. It'll fix the resulting damage. If your backhoe operator swings his backhoe around and takes out the roof or the eave or a wall or a window, it pays for that kind of damage. So builders have to understand that I can just go out there and do whatever I want. My insurance company is going to step in and cover.
There's no insurance for stupidity.
There is no. Absolutely. And there have been cases where the insurance companies have basically said, you were negligent, we're out of here. Mm-hmm. And they won't pay for that third party. And then the builder's finding that not only do they have to defend themselves against their clients, they have to sue their insurance companies to get that third party coverage. So sometimes they can say, look, you were out and out negligent. Your contract doesn't cover negligence.
Yeah. Where we have seen some success is, let's say the builder goofed up on the steel and the resulting damage was that there was a crack. And to fix the crack required us to strip out the plaster, maybe strip out some of the concrete, lace in some new steel, shoot it back in, and then replaster. We would be able to recoup the cost of the plaster because the plaster was sort of in the way of doing that other work. And maybe it couldn't just be patched. Maybe it all had to come out. And maybe that even extended up to the tile. So we've actually, been able to get like tile and plaster covered, but the crack itself was, really a negligent design or construction defect of the original construction. And so that was not covered. Right. And, what we've tried to do on some of these cases is try to get multiple parties to sort of pitch in and help. It's like, hey, if the plaster can, with this issue, maybe the plaster can donate labor and maybe these guys could, deal with the steel and there's demo. Why does, maybe the general contractor can handle the demo because he's got people, even though he's not a pool builder, he's got demo guys that can come.
Jackhammers, right.
And so, maybe sometimes the solution is you end up sort of saying, well, what if you do this and what if you do that? And all of a sudden everyone's kicking in, $20,000 a piece in labor or materials to pull it together. But, we try to be creative in our solutions to make the best situation that we can out of it.
You were talking about how they're not responsible for for that negligence. Being able to have good documentation is very critical. I've done a number of cases where I've represented the pool builders, and maybe the builder didn't have a third party review their steel or have the structural engineer review the steel. And the steel guy might not have used the proper steel schedule. Builder didn't catch it, even though the responsibility ultimately falls on them, but it allows them to also do cross complaints against some of the subcontractors, where we see the subcontractors maybe use the wrong kind of steel chairs or something, or steel's placed too close to the earth, or wrong size bars, they're placed wrong within the wall. So as a builder, how important is having lots of pictures of your project from beginning to end?
Right, it's critical. And we go through at each phase and really systematically take photos. It's not like, I'm leaving for the day, I'll just take a couple snapshots. I mean, I get in the pool and I start at one end and it's like click, click, click. I want to get every 10 feet of that pool or whatever, and I turn the corners and I go all the way around, I get the floor, and it's really, by the time I'm done, I should be able to photographically tape all those things together
and have a 3D model
and have a 3D model of the picture,
right.
With photos when I'm done. And we take it beyond just, it's not just looking at rebar, it's really every step of the way. And sometimes there's markers I like to put in the ground to tell me, pipes, like I'll put a stake in and I'll write pipes, and I take the photo so that I could see the pipes aligned with the stairway, because maybe they're not exactly where they were on paper, right. But maybe down the road there's some leak. At least I could go back to that and say, you know what, the pipes I know are right here because look at this photo, this, the top steps ends here and it looks like it's 8 inches over
right.
from there.
And usually you can scale some other objects in the picture and say, look, here's a 2x4 or a 2x6. Now let's take that and lay it here. We can go, okay, it's 18 inches from the step based on the scale in this image.
Yeah.
So
I've even measured pools by counting the number of 6-inch tiles.
Right, exactly.
The pool is 43 feet long.
Exactly. So, if builders don't have, digital cameras are so inexpensive right now. You can get a high quality digital camera. Every field supervisor, anybody who's out in the field with construction should be taking tons of pictures where the pipes are, the excavation, the open hole. Take a picture of the soil all the way around.
The other thing we do is, like when we're doing waterproofing or tile work or anything that might be temperature sensitive, we have one of those little Ryobi infrared monitoring devices. It actually clips to your phone, and it plugs into the headphone jack, and you download this Ryobi app. And what's cool about it is it shoots out a laser, and you can take the temperature reading at that point. But you see on the screen where the laser is pointing to. It's got the time of day, and you can even put in the owner's address or name or something like that. So let's say we're doing waterproofing, and I'm reading the spec, and it says, not to be applied over 94 degrees or something. Well, I make the guys, before they start in the morning, do that, and I tell them every hour I need that documented, because if a year from now we have a delamination and the manufacturer says, well, you must have installed it on a hot day or something, I'll say, oh no, every hour we recorded it and we averaged 14 degrees below what your spec says. So it can't be that. And we've got photographic evidence of it, and I can't make that up later.
Right.
It's kind of irrefutable.
I'm a little less high tech than you. I've got those $19 Walmart thermometers that you buy in the garden department, and I hang them in the pool. And the same thing. It's the guys, just take a picture. They're date stamped. We've got the picture of the big thermometer. We know, it's within a few degrees.
Yeah, but surfaces can have a different temperature.
Absolutely, but we're usually always shading. We're always shading our work anyway as we're moving along. So just knowing what the temperature is in the work area where the guys are working is very critical. Along those same lines, the other thing that I like to do is when we take delivery of big batches of bagged materials, whether it's thin set or mortars. I'll photograph the pallets also. So I'll get up and I'll take a picture of the tear strip off of a mortar bag that shows the date code, the lot, the batch. And then I'll do the same thing with setting materials. I'll flip the bag over and take a picture of the factory stamping that's on the bag that shows the lot number, the date and time it was manufactured, so that I've got a record. And then I'll usually go back and transfer that to my invoice from the distributor. So in my documentation at the end, we come back, the manufacturer says, you know what, we had a bad lot. We had some polymers that kept re-emulsifying. We've got thin sets that keep, releasing. It's not you. I can say, great, now kick me down materials, labor, tile, we'll solve this problem. So those things happen, but if you can't prove that you're from those lots and you're affected by those batches, you're out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do a lot of the photos just with cameras, just with our phones now, where everything is automatically going into Dropbox as soon as you reconnect to Wi-Fi. And then it's easy to tag all the images. And things like that, I always tell my guys, I want every box of anything that's colored. I want a photo of whatever that color is, because we've had owners at the last minute change colors. Like maybe we even have something in writing saying we're going to use this ivory, but then, at the last minute they're like, oh, well, we actually use this other white, inside the kitchen, and that's what we want to use.
We want
here.
Glacier white.
And then it's like, and then, sometime down the road, it's like you're trying to do some other tile thing, and all of a sudden you're pulling up ivory because that's what your notes say, but you didn't know your guys were told to do something a little bit different. But now if we got photos, it's like, I'm telling them, hey, go back to the photos. Don't look at what our notes say.
Right, because things have changed.
Yeah, things always change. Yeah.
Yep. So it's and the other thing that's neat is when I'm in the field, the other thing I do with photographs is I always take pictures of my permit cards. So somebody will always call me later. Hey, you got this permit number? Do you have this? Do you have that? It happened just the other day when I was down here. My electrician called up and said, I need the permit card. Where is it? And the owners are on vacation. It's locked in the house. And I said, oh, here, I'll text you a picture of the front and back of the permit card.
Yeah.
So,
even the whole drawings, because the city will write stuff on it. They'll put stamps.
They'll put conditions.
And every once in a while, I've had my guys leave that stuff out, and some freak storm comes in, and I get there the next morning, and everything's just bled away because it was all in the rain.
Or they leave it out in the sun. Or they leave it out in the sun, and it's faded, and there's nothing there, and you go, oh my gosh, what does that say?
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's very critical. Photographs from beginning to end, and even. If the homeowners take those same pictures, it's great because now we can compare images. And especially if you get some of those unreasonable homeowners to say, I'm insisting this. And go, well, look at your picture. In your picture, they did it right.
Right.
And sometimes when they see that they're in their own images and it's their own work product, that's proving the fact that saves the builder. They kind of go, oh yeah, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, what can they say? So, so anyway, so once once a defect has been identified and the expert gets out to the job site and has created this report of all the things that they've identified, either through photographs, documentation, field observations. If the parties haven't really come together and you're kind of suspect of the structure, what's kind of the process of deconstructing the shell or doing core drillings? What's kind of the process there?
Yeah, I think for us, a lot of it starts with coring the pool, because a compression test you can get out of a 4-inch or 6-inch diameter core will tell you a lot about what's going on. First of all, we can, the compression test will tell you whether you met the spec, and we've had pools that came up so far below spec, it's like, there's no way to save this pool. It's never going to hold water. And other ones where maybe it didn't quite come up to maybe 4,000 or 5,000 psi, maybe it came up to 3,000, and then we could go back and kind of reverse engineer it and say, yeah, you know what, 3,000 works structurally. It doesn't meet the code requirements in the durability chapter of ACI 318, but maybe we could solve that with a very robust waterproofing system or something like that. And we end up spending some more money somewhere else to extend the life of the shell, because they didn't get it out of having a really hard shell to begin with. But we would core it following the C42 standard. Typically the cores would go off to a lab and we get a report back from them saying here's what the compression test came out to be. And then petrographic analysis, usually that is taken from a 6-inch diameter core and sliced up thin, and they're using different X-ray diffraction and other techniques to really study microscopically what's going on from a chemical standpoint. What's inside that matrix? There's a certain percentage of sand, there's coarse aggregates. You can start to see if there's alkali silica reaction. You could see if there's chlorides.
I understand they can even identify the type of aggregates that are in the mix by looking at them.
Yeah, I mean, we had a case where the owner, it was a commercial pool, and they were claiming that there were problems with the concrete. So we had some testing done and found out that the problems with the concrete were chlorides. And it was all occurring right at the edge of the pool. And when the chemistry of the pool was tested, we found out that their salt levels were off the chart. They had been dumping chlorine in there for years and years, and of course chlorine is salt,
right?
And it's a salt maker. That's what chlorine means. And the salts get splashed out onto the deck. In fact, I was in this pool while people were doing laps, and every time someone would do a flip turn, you would just see them kick this big wave up onto this deck. Those chlorides were going in there and eating away at the steel and rusting everything up, and the concrete was just full of chlorides. But if you went 10 feet away, there were no chlorides in there, and we knew based on the trucking tickets that the concrete was the same mix. So
Right.
It wasn't that the concrete was delivered with the chlorides, it was clearly originating from the pool. And so it really took the heat off the builder, because the builder was able to say, look, this is a maintenance problem.
Right.
You guys let the chloride level get way too high in the pool and didn't seal your decks.
And chloride ion penetration, you can't analyze that by looking at it on the surface.
No,
you literally
can't
have to
see anything.
You have to core it and literally send it to a lab so they can look at cross sections.
Right. And maybe if the owner had sealed things up better, it might have worked. Maybe the original concrete spec could have been better. Maybe they should have used stainless steel rebar on the edge details or
denser
something.
concrete, maybe waterproof admix.
Yeah, so there was actually plenty of blame to go around, but you couldn't just blame the guy that poured the concrete.
Right.
It wasn't, that wasn't the issue. In fact, the concrete looked fantastic everywhere except for right around the pool, where the concrete was getting etched and the spalling of the corroding steel and everything.
Sometimes, though, with that etching that you're talking about, sometimes that is just a direct result of too much salt in the pool. Sometimes it's bad finish work. So there are some other things that occur also in concrete. We can't always jump to the fact that it's a chlorine. I just want to point out that sometimes it's bad finishing. It's a windy day. The concrete's all dried out and it's got hairline cracks everywhere, eggshell cracking. So.
Could have been overworked or something, and yeah. Yeah, lots of different
things that can
So,
happen.
and petrographic analysis
Identifies
all those
issues.
Yeah.
It tells us if there's too much bleed water. It tells us where
too
it
much
was in the
paste
mix.
or not enough paste or whatever.
So it's a very telltale. It's really pulling back the curtain and letting you know what's happening within the cement. So I know some of the more troubling cases that I've been involved with usually deal with electricity, stray electricity around a pool. Whenever there's electrolysis or galvanization or even stray voltage in the pool, it's very hard to chase those down. I've had the privilege of working with Dr. Hamilton on a case, and he literally spent 4 days trying to find the source of electricity. And it wasn't coming from the pool. It was coming from a commercial dryer in the basement. They have a commercial laundry at this estate, and it was whenever they ran the dryer. So it was really it was a swinging short that you would only find whenever the dryer ran.
Right.
So when the housekeeper was there washing sheets and washing linens is when they had stray voltage in the pool. So it was really one of those things that was very difficult to find. And he basically, we got to the house and he says, okay, I need you to go through the house and start every appliance one at a time, every light switch, every circuit, go through each room, the entire, 4 stories of the house. I need to go through and turn the lights on. I need you to run, if there's a blow dryer, I want you to turn it on. Dishwasher, washing machines, just go through. Fortunately, we started in the basement and worked up, so we found the dryer right away.
Right.
But it was still, he said, I still need to do everything all the way to the attic. Let's go through, let's cycle the air conditioners, let's cycle everything. And it turned out it was a function of the grounding rods were actually in rock, so they didn't have a lot of conductivity to earth. Yeah. So instead of that stray voltage discharging itself into the ground at the service entrance, it was following the grounding conductors down to the pool and energizing the pool. No fault of the pool, but it's one of those things that, sometimes it takes tens of thousands of dollars to figure out where you've got other problems.
Yeah. And the solution there was just turn on the garden hose for 20 minutes.
What they did was they added a second grounding rod and added a drip irrigation system around it to keep the soil around the grounding rods wet. So as part of the sprinkler system, so every day or whenever the irrigation system came on, it would keep the soil wet around the grounding rods to keep the conductors to increase the conductivity to the soil.
Right.
But again, I learned something there that there actually is a section of the National Electric Code that talks about the conductivity of the soil to the grounding rod. There's actually a standard. Not that electricians ever measure it, but there's actually a standard. So he said, well, if we add some extra grounding rods, obviously get rid of the washing machine or the dryer and get a new one. And then they went through and they upgraded a bunch of electrical service. They put arc faults in, GFCIs, and did a bunch of other things to make sure that we weren't going to be having that electrical spillage anymore. Right. But it's, oftentimes it's not the pool, even though we're brought in because that's where the problem's manifesting itself. Oftentimes it's not the pool. Unfortunately, in that case, there were a lot of issues with the pool also. It started as an electrical issue. It ended up, there were a lot of other issues with the pool.
Right.
The pool builder, had they not had the bad dryer, the pool builder would have never gotten drawn into all the things. But, it is what it is when you land on the job site.
Yeah, and so like this testing we're talking about, if that's sort of the first step is you're diagnosing electrical issues or coring the pool and trying to figure out what's going on, there's sort of this reverse engineering process. And in a way, you were sort of reverse engineering this electrical stuff. And we do that with structural calculations or even hydraulic stuff. And you and I have worked on some of that stuff too, where we're looking at pipes that are undersized and pumps that are oversized, and we can reverse engineer it and say, well, the maximum flow we can put through that pipe is this, and if we put in a variable speed pump and we lock it down, we could get this kind of a turnover, but maybe the solution is we add another pump. Right. Or and another filter or something to get the turnover. I mean, I saw at Penton.
Or we split drains because we don't have enough.
Yeah, I had Dave Penton help me out with a project in Beverly Hills that had this situation where the water quality wasn't very good, and they really should have had more filtration. And when we looked at the plumbing, it was also undersized. There was no way they were ever going to get there. But the whole pool was all tile. All glass tile, and it was a big pool. So it would have been a very expensive and invasive process to figure it out. But I figured out a way to reconfigure the outlets and actually add another pump and filter to achieve a proper turnover without having tear apart this pool. So there's easy fixes for that stuff, and the builder came in.
Sometimes there's easy fixes.
Yeah, sometimes, right. So the reverse engineering, sometimes it's calculations, and we can show, just like we're calculating out a new pool, if the worksheet says it's going to fail because the wall is yielding too much, or it's going to fail because the steel is stressed too much, or the concrete section isn't thick enough, for example. We would find out the same thing if we had an existing structure and plugged in the same variables into the sheet. It would tell us whether it was going to work or not. And if it says NG, that means no good. And it's like, well, there's not another engineer that's going to have a different sheet that says it is good. We all are plugging in the same numbers, and we're pretty much all using the same software to do it with. So we all come up with this answer, no good. All right, so what do you do then? Well, I don't know, maybe tear it out, do a partial tear out. Somehow you start working out what the solution is, and that's
you start debating the possible solutions to the
owners. Then your report starts turning into what are the fixes, and if it's a tear out, then it's kind of easy. What did you spend to do it? What's it going to cost to take it out? At least get the owner back to the point where they could start over, so they get a check for that, I guess. If it's a repair and everyone's still on good terms, maybe the original builder stays in. Usually not, because usually by the time it's turned into that deep of a lawsuit, the owner doesn't even want the people on their property without their attorneys present, and that's just an unfortunate thing that happens when people stop communicating. And if everyone kept communicating, they would never even be in the lawsuit. They would just work it out, and everyone would save a lot of time and money, but no one ever thinks about that. They take a hard line, and that's it.
Well, and I think the builders that tend to take the hard line are the ones that have probably made that call maybe on a prior project, say, well, I'm just going to call my insurance company. Well, the insurance company says,
right.
That's usually their first response. It's like, we don't cover that.
Yeah, we can't cover your stupidity.
Right. We can't cover
you
your
got to go fix it on your own.
We can't cover
time.
your workmanship. And then it's that, okay, how deep do I dig into my pocket to make that work? So, so there's a lot of things that go into deconstructing a project, and hopefully our listeners have kind of come to the realization that you don't want us on your job sites after the fact, and it's probably a lot easier to spend a few dollars up front to hire somebody if you think you might be in over your head, to pay the consultants up front to keep you out of the lawsuits and keep you out of litigation.
Yeah, and education too. I mean, I know, like classes that we do through Genesis, some of them cost thousands of dollars, but that's pretty cheap insurance when you start to think about, what some of these projects cost. Even a $50,000 pool, one little mistake, if it costs you 10%, that's $5,000.
Right.
Well, what if you spent $3,000 taking a really good class and then didn't make all those mistakes anymore? Right. Now you just saved a couple grand, and you got to go out and have a little fun
over and over and over
something.
and over again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And that $50,000 project, if it had to be torn out, might cost $150 to
absolutely.
To replace.
It's always far more than the original pool costs.
Because you have all the surrounding landscape and infrastructure and everything, plus you got to tear the pool out, and the new pool is going to be built to a different standard.
Yeah, and I've also found a common theme with these is that the pool that was originally built, one of the reasons the builder didn't just go in and keep fixing stuff is because he probably lost his ass on the job because he underbid it to begin with. That pool could have never been done for $50,000 by any other builder, right? He bid it for $50,000, built it for $50,000, lost money, and that's why he wasn't willing to step up and fix the stuff.
Right.
So now it shouldn't be a surprise that things cost 3 times as much to fix it.
Okay, so I wanted to thank you for joining us on this episode of Ask the Masters, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Ask the Masters podcast, and don't forget to check out our Facebook page each week on Tuesdays for new episodes of the show. I also want to encourage you to stop by the Ask the Masters Facebook page and invite other like-minded individuals to join us there as well. Feel free to jump into the conversations and even post your own questions. We want to create a community which fosters learning and discovery for the betterment of us all. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Please be sure to subscribe and feel free to share.